Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the second part of class. We're going to talk about divorce for a while, and talk about some of the factors involved in divorce and some of the religious and pastoral themes surrounding divorce. So you might just be thinking about what words divorce conjures in your mind as we begin the class, and kind of think about all the associations, religious and otherwise, that surround divorce for you. And you might think of kind of particular religious themes that pertain to divorce, and what impact those religious themes pertaining to divorce have on the care of families and kin networks, especially with the rates of divorce or the rates of people who've been divorced in our society. So let's begin with that, maybe, and talk through some of the current picture of divorce. So there's many couples consider divorcing, and that's something that's worth mentioning in pastoral care. Divorce rates in the United States hover around half, although they've gone down for people in the current generation, millennials. And 1 in 3 children are in single-parent families. And so when you talk about divorce, often you're talking about single parenting as well. And so you could talk about the impact of single parenting and also our ideas about single parenting as well. So the 1 in 3 children lives in a single parent family, as I mentioned before. So there's an increasing rate of secularization in our culture, alternative families, and the economic freedom of women, all of which lead to some scholars saying that divorce is a sign of increasing gender resistance to oppression, especially the notion that marriage is a kind of relationship of coverture or bondage to one's partner. So there's prior psychiatric disorders do tend to lead to divorce, and there's an overestimation of the harm that divorce does to children. So in the studies, I can share some of these studies with you in a folder as well, the impact of divorce on children. In the studies, it can be hard to tease out what's the impact of divorce versus what's the impact of conflict in a parent's relationship ahead of the divorce. There does tend to be a period of adjustment after divorce, which with some mental health concerns showing up for kids, and about 2 to 5 years tends to be the time frame for that, where adolescents might experience depression, low self-esteem, antisocial behaviors. There are some things that can be done, however, it seems to help a lot if parents can involve children in plans. And interestingly, they found that among kids whose parents have divorced, often they can be helped by having a lot of flexibility in their schedule and the ability to go back and forth between their parents' homes. So geographical proximity makes a big difference in terms of divorce adjustment for kids. Some of the financial consequences of divorce can be pretty extreme for women. Women's subsequent incomes are 56% that of their spouses. And divorce is higher among African Americans, 20 to 30% higher than among whites, with women bearing the brunt of this. White women tend to be the happiest after divorce. So according to some scholars, the divorce therapy involves a dissolution of family bonds, a dissolution of marital bonds. And you might think back on the readings we had from Gottman about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Those were signs early on in a couple that conflict in a marriage was going to lead to divorce. And those signs included kind of systematically showing contempt for the partner and avoiding conflict, or conflict in ways that were deeply damaging or unhealthy for the partner. From a family life cycle perspective, you might just think about what are the impacts of divorce at different points in the life cycle. So when families are going through certain types of changes, early, late, middle, late in their lives, what are the impacts of divorce then, and what are the things that tend to lead to divorce at those particular times? So I read in preparation for this class, I read a book by a divorce lawyer whose title was "If You're in My Office, It's Already Too Late." And he suggested that there's something different, distinctively different about our time, and that if he was going to create a perfect machine for affairs, he would create Facebook. So he was encouraging partners not to use Facebook, and especially its private messaging feature, because of the prevalence of people leading to affairs through that kind of communication. Divorce can be a powerful release of energy for those who are stuck in a developmental stage in their marriage. So for some, divorce is like a new start, a breath, jolt of nitrogen in the soil system, and it can be a moment of individuation within the family life cycle, in which a breakdown of the togetherness of a marriage relationship can lead to people developing a stronger personal identity. So the developmental danger is also a developmental opportunity for some families as they learn to bond more closely with other parents. So the picture for divorce is not all bad. In other words, it's not completely negative, and some families discern divorce after they've reached a set of non-negotiables in their relationship, in which the relationship comes to an end. But in terms of counseling, what you want to do is help each partner discern their own contribution to the divorce and change the pattern of seeking the other's confirmation for their identity. So some people leave marriages with a story that they're telling themselves that it's entirely the other person's fault. If you leave a marriage with that kind of story, it tends to lead to more relationship problems in the next marriage. But if there's a process of kind of coming to realize one's own contribution to the divorce, which you can do in almost every case, that can be a healthier sign for the ongoing process of psychological readjustment after divorce. So the goals, counseling-wise, are to understand everybody's personal contribution to divorce and change the pattern of seeking one sense of self through another. So divorce inevitably involves a loss of an object, so there's grief there, and personal ego injury. There's often a question of who am I after divorce. There's role loss and role disorientation that can all lead to a lowering of self-esteem after divorce. It's important if you're in a counseling role of any kind, whether as a minister or a chaplain or a counselor, that you ask yourself about your attitudes related to divorce and saving a marriage. So it can be important to know what your own presumptions are as you enter this and how they might be related to your own family life cycle and genogram. So in the cases of counseling people who are divorcing, it's really important that you talk to both partners in the couple, because if you just talk to one partner, it's much more likely that that will lead to divorce, with the one exception of a domestic violence situation. So, and you have to watch out for someone who wants to bring a partner to counseling and then drop them off and exit the relationship. So you want to make sure that you don't agree to do a counseling scenario like that. So sometimes divorce comes up after certain transitions in the life cycle. For example, one couple who were in a second marriage found themselves struggling after their second child was born, feeling both smothered and overprotected, and not like they were not in love with one another, and they eloped early to cut off from their family, and so you might just want to see what are what are the life cycle factors that lead to a divorce being present at a particular point in the life cycle, and how do they relate to one another's genogram, especially when it comes to relationship cutoff and that kind of thing. Children in high conflict marriages do better if the parents divorce, and rarely is there anything a spouse can do when the other wants to sever ties. So, and it could be a period of trial or structured separation. So the basic point there is divorce is a complicated picture, and it's not simply one thing. And ministers need to understand their own attitudes towards it in order to properly support families going through this transition. And the challenge is, according to Culbertson, many people are left on their own to deal with the fallout of divorce. People think this is the end of a relationship, but it's actually the start of a new kind of relationship, a divorced relationship, in which there's frequently, in fact, emotional intensity might go up after a divorce rather than reducing. So people find themselves after divorce kind of evaluating the promises that they've made. Women file for divorce at higher rates than men who might expect caretaking, and a wedding does not constitute a marriage. So sometimes people never succeed in creating a marriage in their relationship. If we remember, Culbertson defined a marriage as that turning point when your partner's well-being is just as important as your own. So a wedding doesn't constitute a marriage. 2/3 of divorces occur between the 5th and the 15th year of marriage. But divorce is the end of many rich traditions. One thing we have to watch out for in divorce is that sometimes it becomes a place where we can't accept negative feelings about ourselves, but we project those onto others. So we might blame our partner for feelings that you can't handle in yourself, like your anger or your hatred, and you might say you're the bad one, or you're the angry one. In his book, Getting the Love You Want, Harville Hendricks talks about how people who marry are unconsciously trying to work at previous generations' relationships. And so when they marry, they inevitably marry the wrong person because they marry the person who helps them, in a sense, to work through the conflicts from their own family of origin. So divorce, Hendricks warns, is not something that should be taken on too lightly if a person hasn't kind of discerned first what the emotional work of the marriage is in terms of their own maturity or self-differentiation. So there's a sense in which divorce can be a part of the call of a family life cycle. It can be the result of learning to be faithful to yourself. I don't know if all divorces are, but ideally, with the help of pastoral care or counseling, people can learn what it means to enter divorce with some consciousness and self-awareness, and then they can learn also what it means to be faithful to themselves in the act of divorce, and thus divorce can be part of the process of spiritual growth in relationship to the life cycle. Divorce is always an option when marriage has lost its sanctity. So there's certain risks associated with divorce that someone would go back and repeat some of the same patterns. We were talking in the last lecture about intimate partner violence, and that if there's not a serious kind of treatment process for those who've been victimized, there is a chance that they might enter another relationship that has some of the same qualities or characteristics. Culbertson talks about some of the reasons why people get divorced. Men complain about quantity, and women complain about the quality of sex lives. But factors external to marriage can also pave the way for divorce, including loss, unemployment, serious illness, unexpected death. Actually, one of the surprising things is that extramarital affairs are actually pretty far down the list in terms of the reasons why people divorce. So there's actually, you can kind of look at the narratives of decline around divorce. So divorce includes a kind of story which has emotions related to it, and also a lot of projected feelings on each person's part, things that they don't want to see within themselves, and so they push on other people. And so counseling around divorce wants to try to help people see their own role and contribution to the trajectory of divorce, and then some processing of that so that they can do better emotionally. Again, women, when they divorce, cite a lack of communication and shared interest, and men cite nagging wives and their own immaturity and economic factors such as infidelity, alcoholism, or abuse. They're all pretty low down on the list. What sometimes happens is that men, divorce kind of sneaks up on men, and they find themselves divorced without knowing why. So women do better emotionally after divorce if they're the ones who initiate the divorce. And from a family systems perspective, divorce and loss often go together. So divorce can be a way of dealing with the death of an authority figure in a past generation. So when it comes time to a couple choosing to divorce, you can ask them why, just like with marriage, why are you choosing to marry now? You can also ask, why are you choosing to divorce now? And you can have the in-laws come in from each side to a divorce counseling session. And sometimes couples ask themselves, how long will it be before he or she remarries? Over interference by the family of origin in a couple's lives can be a risk factor for divorce. And women who rely on the family of origin for support are less able then to establish authoritative relationships with their children. Culbertson really encourages couples who are divorcing not to run out of the marriage into another relationship or rush into the arms of another after a marriage, but to kind of give some time for self-care and self-healing, self-exploration before they enter another relationship. So there's the stages of divorce, which really actually occurs long before the divorce itself. When the couple stops having sex, when they stop eating together, when they develop new friendships that start to bear all the weight of their relationship. And then they can want to leave a relationship but not have the courage to do it. So they kind of do exit fight rituals where each partner wants the other one to take responsibility. And so they fight and try to kind of tempt the other person into leaving. So divorce is what they call a crazy time. It's one of those in-between periods. What can happen is with a lower level of individuation, a person might not have the spiritual ability to see kind of what the psychological and spiritual growth aspects of a divorce are, kind of coming to grapple with their own role in the marriage. And if they don't do that, then what happens is they don't really get a chance to retrieve themselves from their marriage. So the goal of divorce counseling is to help each partner retrieve their broken dreams, and so that they can have the chance to promise again in a new relationship. That can only happen when they're able to retrieve themselves from their marriage, which is a psychological process of grappling with their own role in the divorce. One of the challenges is that people tend to be pretty venomous about their spouses afterwards, and so children hear a lot of that, especially with adults who have few friends. Children are often the ones who are turned to. So just as it takes the children 2 to 5 years to adjust after divorce, it also takes an adult 2 to 5 years to become an autonomous adult after a divorce. 70% of men and 65% of women remarry but the divorce rates are twice as high in remarriages. In part because people haven't done the hard work of kind of retrieving themselves from a marriage. So just like with any kind of bereavement, the goal is to try to not make complicated decisions too quickly after a divorce, not make important financial decisions. So a pastor might want to bring in mediation if they sense that a couple is divorcing but leaving in a very unequitable way. So for one or the other persons. So one of the challenges for kids is that they tend to feel like they've been split into parts with his or hers, with kids kind of choosing one side or the other. And the parents can do the best in divorce if they find a way to challenge that phenomenon and share the kids equally. So people are pulled in relationships towards identity or communion. They're pulled towards, I'm going to define myself, or I'm going to be with you. And marriages that have really strong withness, almost to the point of fusion, for them, a breakdown of a marriage can lead to a breakthrough in identity, and it can leave the leaving partner with a new source of identity and strength. So one of the most important things to help after a marriage is to teach a couple that marriage doesn't end a relationship. It creates a new kind of divorce doesn't end a relationship. It creates a new kind of post-divorce relationship. And so the divorcing is a process, and the couples remain largely linked after divorce, often through bonds of hostility. So there's a lot of pastoral wisdom that's required to help partners who are going through a separation, and then they might need mediation to make wise decisions about what they're keeping in a marriage and what they're leaving behind, so that these decisions aren't made too quickly. And I think many marriages are remarriages now. So you might be thinking to yourself, what are the distinctive roles that you need to take as a pastor, counselor, or chaplain in helping people be able to marry again, being able to promise again? Among the kinds of human speech that we have, the things that we say in church when we're getting married are some of the most profound and serious commitments that we make to one another. What does it take for us to say those things again? What's the nature of the relational and spiritual process involved in saying those things again? So again, just like marriage, a divorce is a process. It's a meaning-making event, and it is one of the areas where we tend to kind of shift ourselves into blame and scapegoating rather than taking responsibility for our own side of the grief. Some people, if they are thoughtful, are able to do well after a divorce and care for themselves and discover a renewed sense of spirituality. Others find themselves kind of entering a stage of pretty low levels of differentiation and maybe marrying a couple more times. And those folks tend to be driven unconsciously by their genogram and by grief events and other events that are happening in the family's life, other social problems like addiction and mental illness. And sometimes those folks end up in a series of serial marriages in which they have a hard time kind of withdrawing the emotional energy from one relationship and bringing it to another. So I want to ask you, as we come to a close for today, as you counsel people, one of the things that's definitely going to come up is the counseling for divorce. So a couple will come to you as a pastor and ask you and share the story about their relationship and begin talking about meeting some of the non-negotiables in their marriage and considering divorce. So given what we've talked about today, I wonder what are going to be your first impulses in counseling people about divorce, and how would you help each partner in a marriage discern where their vocation is, and help them to understand the emotional impact of where they are, so that they can be in the process of discovering if divorce is what it means for them to be faithful to themselves at this point, as difficult of a decision that it is. So we want to be careful that people aren't divorcing unconsciously, hoping to solve all of their problems through divorcing, just like they hope to solve all their problems through marrying. But divorce happens to be a time when a great deal of spiritual growth and change can happen, often in midlife, and it's a time when people frequently have a chance to be in touch with themselves in a new way, and sometimes experience deep change and spiritual growth through the presence of God's Spirit. So there's not one story to tell about divorce. In fact, I would be careful about anybody who tells too simple or too simplistic of a story about this human phenomenon. And I think it's important for us to have divorce as an option. I'm grateful that we have the liberalization of divorce laws. And I think it's also important to understand what it takes for people to grow in and through and after a divorce in ways that make them more present to themselves and present to all their other relationships. Okay, thank you so much.